Correction officers of Reddit, have you ever met an inmate that was actually a very nice person but did absolutely horrifying crimes? If so, what's their story? I tutored in juvie. One of the boys had murdered 3 people for a gang initiation and when asked, had absolutely no remorse for it. He was a very nice, polite, and intelligent kid though who would draw me little pictures and always tried extra hard on his creative writing assignments. Had a very good sense of humor too and often made everyone in the room laugh and smile. I honestly had trouble reminding myself that he was a cold-blooded murderer. Corrections nurse here. Never interacted with this inmate. I just see him out on the yard as I come into work. He collects bread crusts and I always see him feeding the birds. And the birds trust him and fly straight to his hand to eat. He looks like a nice enough guy from a distance. And birds only land on the hands of Disney princesses. Right? Well, one day I caught him in a moment. A particularly fat pigeon landed on his hand and bent down to eat. He closed his fist on the pigeon's head and flicked his wrist to snap its neck. Its body was still flailing as he calmly put it into his pocket and then put out his hand again to feed more birds. I was told he was going to cook and eat it, which made me feel a little better. But still. And that's what comes to my mind every time an inmate is nice to me. Not a CO. RN here. I've taken care of a fair amount of detained prisoners that have been admitted to the hospital. I usually ask them what got him locked up cause I'm nosy. I had one super pleasant middle-aged guy tell me his story. Apparently he and his wife were going through or had gone through an ugly split. They were already separated when someone broke into his house with a weapon intending to hurt him. He wound up killing the guy in self-defense. I assume he had a gun or something. But not before he found out his wife had arranged it. She hired a hitman to come kill him. But instead of going to the police after, he went to his wife's place and killed her outright. Super friendly guy though. No idea how much of that was true, but that's definitely the craziest story I've heard from an inmate. Former CO here. I had 2 guys in my unit that strangled their newborns when they wouldn't stop crying. One of them was drinking and trying to watch a hockey game. His daughter wouldn't stop crying. He got annoyed, walked over and just choked her until she stopped. The other guy's story was somewhat similar, but I can't remember the details. They were both porters in that housing unit. They were doing a lot of time. Can't remember exactly how much they were given. One guy was already at year 16. Probably 2 of the nicest guys I met while on the job. They didn't come off as crazy degenerates and seemed like genuinely nice guys. I used to stand in the day room and have some interesting convos with them and their little crew they called the trailer trash circle or something to that effect. My dad worked as a doctor in a prison for a short time. Came back with lots of stories of the inmates. He said he talked to one guy who was always friendly and chill. Found out the guy had a life sentence and asked the guy why he was in prison. The guy said he had a bad lawyer. My dad looked up his information later on and it turned out he had murdered his own daughter. So yay. Never judge a book by its cover. Not a CO. But I did work in a prison. Lots of inmates were seemingly decent people. One guy in particular was a hitman. He and his story were well known at the time. When I met him, I had no idea who he was and wondered what he could have done to land in prison. When I found out who he was, I read one of the books about him. That guy was pretty brutal. My husband is a CO. The guys he talks about actually sound like good people. Then I ask what they did and it will always be a murderer or guy who spent years raping his own kids. Sounds like your husband is a personable man. Having the ability to casually interact with people who've done horrible things on a daily basis is probably one of the most important skills to have in an environment like that. Ex-CO here. Had a man who shot and killed one state trooper and shot another in the groin. He sat as a sniper in the woods and shot the troopers through the windows of the barracks. It was premeditated and he nearly got away with it. He was on FBI most wanted list for a good 2 months. The marshals caught him as he was getting ready to take off on a hang glider. Anyway, he was the most mild-mannered inmate I had met. Always reading. Never turned down his hour for rec. Always finished his plate. etc. Anyway, I was doing an escort with another officer to take him to visitation. He was to wear double locked shackles and cuffs when not in his cell. Even in the showers. I was holding his arm and assisting him so he wouldn't trip, and I felt his bicep flex and he just stopped walking and looked at me. I realized at that moment that he could overpower me without much effort. Shackles or not. Turns out he just had to sneeze. My point is that whether someone is mild-mannered or more primitive has no effect on human capabilities. Cold-blooded Krella. For a more accurate picture, I am a 5'8", 125-pound female. Edited to add a closing sentence. Edited again to add that I'm a female. Not a CO but worked in a psych ward. In this case the guy went to prison and was eventually stepped down to our psych ward. He had stabbed his dad multiple times and killed him. He was with us for around a year, so I saw him 5-6 times a week. Anywhere from 8-14 hours each shift. He was so kind and polite. You would never think he had done anything remotely shocking. When his relationship with his dad would come up, he would talk so calmly and normally. No real hatred or anger. Yet he murdered him. If there were ever fights on the ward, he would look out for staff and other patients. I won't lie. He was a delight. TLDR, worked with a murderer. He was one of my nicest patients. Former CO here. One particular inmate fit this bill for me. I worked third shift on a housing unit and as such had to oversee the floor cleaning crew, comprised of 7 or 8 inmates, one of whom was their supervisor. The supervisor was a guy I just didn't understand. He was about 50. Extremely polite. Worked his ass off. Never got into trouble or broke the rules. Always kept his guys on task. I didn't get it. I knew he had been in since he was 18 but never bothered to look up his crime until I was about to leave the job. Sure enough. It was bad. At 18 he had abducted, raped, and kept a 13-year-old girl in his parents' basement for about a week. I think it was his parents who turned him in. Former CO. Absolutely all the time. I usually found myself having pleasant conversations with inmates almost like they are old buddies, only to find out they are in for horrendous crimes. Had one guy who was super kind. Trying to give me advice. I was a 19-year-old fresh-faced CO. About how to manage inmates with my inferior age and size. Super kind and respectful. I looked him up on our system to see what he was in for. Expecting something small. To find he was in for murder and arson in the first degree. Honestly, the both comforting and terrifying thing is majority of inmates are just like everyone else who just have made bad. Some really bad choices. TV greatly over-exaggerates criminals to be sociopaths. Set in their ways. And inhumane. It puts into perspective how easily you could be on the other side of the bars. Not a CO. But every person that came in contact with Edmund Kemper said he was well spoken and seemed like a gentle giant. Until he started talking about his crimes. I think that's what makes him the most fearsome serial, in my opinion. Because with the way he talks and seems kind at first, I probably would have been a young dumb kid that would have gotten in his car too. From my personal experience, the nicest inmates are usually the ones who have committed the worst crimes. Murder, act. The ones that always give you problems are the guys that get arrested for minor shit like petty theft, cannabis, loitering. They always come in with major attitudes that never ends well. Obligatory, not a corrections officer. But I am an intake mental health therapist. And we see a large number of people who are put on probation. Respecting confidentiality and all. There was one guy I remember who was in his early 50s. Had done some objectively horrible things. And it all stemmed from trauma actions. He grew up severely abused and neglected. And he wanted so much to just be able to be left alone to live life. As he knew he couldn't function in society. It was heartbreaking. Former inmate here. Long story short, I was sentenced to state prison for selling small amounts of marijuana. And during my time in the high security classification facility I enrolled in a Jewish study group to meet people and pass the time. One of the other regular members happened to be a former professor of economics from UPenn, specializing in game theory, who happened to be a really nice and personable guy if you could just look past the fact he was therefore beating his wife to death with a crowbar over a divorce settlement. Needless to say, we made a lot of prisoner's dilemma jokes. I've spent a year with a prisoner. I was fellow inmate. The sickest, most wild guy would talk all the time, and he was friendly and nice but would turn on you in seconds if you said something wrong. Super short fuse. Screaming off the handle. You always had a sense of no soul in his eyes. Current CO here. Back when I worked with juveniles, I had one kid that was very quiet, relatively well behaved, and friendly enough that it almost made you forget that he'd beaten his sister down, duct taped her to the bed, and brutally raped her. Or the similar kid that was involved in the shooting death of a 9-month-old baby. Working with juveniles sucks. Former caseworker, state prison, CO, and jailer. Frequently the people you meet interact in a normal manner. If I didn't know what their past was, you wouldn't be able to guess. 3 are most assuredly exceptions to this. I've had inmates on my caseload that most definitely did not deserve prison. I've also had a few that I have no issue believing they have no soul. I am not a CO, but I work in addictions recovery. You realize that everyone is fundamentally the same when you get wrecked in a game of Magic the Gathering by a Latino gangbanger with teardrop tattoos. That guy could sling spells like nobody's booziness. He was also really good at killing people apparently. Supervisor here. I run chow each morning, and a while back there was a guy who would come through the line each morning smiling and being quite friendly and personable, saying "Good morning, Lieutenant." He was friendly enough that I had never bothered to look him up as far as his crime details. Much later I go to his unit to visit the officer and notice a strange open letter on the officer's desk. I ask about it and the officer tells me, "Oh yeah, that's from Jones. He's been trying to get back to his Caribbean country for years. Turns out the guy has dual citizenship and wants to get transferred there. He can't though because his crime was committed in our state. He had gotten in a big argument with his wife outside his house one winter night and beat her to death and then cut off her head. He then took the head and left the body on the doorstep. Even more messed up was that he left their 2-year-old with the body. Police later received a call about a crying child and found the kid holding on to his dead mother in the snow. The kid was cold but unharmed. The inmate still comes through the line just as friendly as can be. I wish him good morning in return, but keep a bit closer eye on him now that I know his background. Not a CO, but a cop. Arrested a dude one time for raping his granddaughter an uncountable number of times and videotaping it, producing child pornography, and possessing hundreds of GB of child porn. He would show his granddaughter the porn and tell her that's what granddaughters do for grandfathers. She was 6. He was a normal, nice dude with us. Cooperative and had a pretty good family life. Doesn't change the fact that he was an evil duck who is going to die in prison. I still think about that case a lot. I wonder how the girl is doing. I've often thought about checking in with the family, but I didn't want to rekindle any past memories. Hope they are well. I know he'll never taste freedom again. Both of my parents work at a psychiatric hospital for people who are found mentally incompetent to stand trial, or that are awaiting assessment for it. My mom never wants to know what people did, because she doesn't want it to color her opinion of them. Sometimes surreal things happen. Like a guy standing in the yard looking really hard at something just outside the fence. She asked him what he was doing and he said, "Look at that weird bird. Do you see that tall bird over there? It keeps looking at me." She just told him she couldn't see it, but her eyesight was bad. And it was outside the fence, so he was safe. He accepted that answer and wandered off. There are so many that are locked up because they have mental issues. Get arrested for walking down the street naked or something. Get institutionalized. Get medicine. Get better. Get released. Quit taking medicine. Repeat. But there are some that did really horrific things. and that will never see freedom again. Some guy murdered his mother and cut out her heart and pissed in the cavity. That's the one that really sticks out. Very nice docile dude. Gotta wonder if he just lost his mind. Or if she did something awful to him. Obligatory, not a correction officer. But I had a similar job. One of the nicest, most polite, likable inmates that I worked with was serving time for assaulting an off-duty police officer. The officer was in the hospital for months and had serious brain damage to where he will never recover and live his normal life again. If I didn't know the backstory and just met this inmate on the street, I would have thought he'd be someone I'd be friends with. He was kind, calm, and funny and liked by all the staff and never would have been pegged as someone who would commit such a crime. However, shockingly enough, he was never sorry about his actions or said he regretted what happened or anything. Maybe his likable personality was just a ruse. But it worked. I interned at a mental health ward for kids. On my first day, I just played cards and basketball with all the kids to get to know them. One girl stuck out to me. She was a little kooky, but had a great sense of humor and was amazing at I described her as a budding card shark to my internship group. On my second day, I read the kids' files. Miss Card Shark was in there for killing her family's dog. I was so shaken. I considered asking to switch to a different internship, but ended up staying. MCS had actually been there for 2 years and was in the final stages of successful treatment. So for the rest of my time with her, she was just like any other kid. It was definitely weird, though, when she was playing games with other kids and would jokingly say "I'll heal you." I am a CO. Twice a week I go and get an inmate to clean up offices in the facility. He has access to lots of things he could heal me with. Has healed people and as a former shot caller, has had lots of people beat down, stabbed, and some healed. I love to read. And this guy has read pretty much every book written. As he's been in seg so much that he just read all day. All the time. Since I don't share any personal details with inmates. Whether they just stole a truck or held kids or talked in theaters. Real heinous shit. You know. And keep my life on lockdown. Books are a safe topic. He is very smart. And has a grasp of literature and its impact that is refreshing and enjoyable. I love talking with Garnell, made up name, about books while he cleans and I make sure he doesn't get into off-limits areas or heal anyone. I work in juvenile corrections. There are a lot of pretty nice kids that have done some pretty ducked up shit. One in particular is a little 12-year-old that gets constantly picked on by the other inmates because he is short and he has bowel problems so he has to wear diapers. Turns putty abused multiple little kids. Would trap rats to break their spines. And had a habit of throwing cats off of tall buildings to see if they land on their feet. Not me. But my dad was a CO and had someone in his building that was a respected member of a Jewish community somewhere. His daughter's boyfriend raped her and left her for dead on the side of the road. The inmate found and rescued his daughter. Then went and killed the boyfriend with a shotgun. Outside of this one act that got him life in prison. The inmate was a very intelligent and nice guy. Only heard about him once. Dad didn't like to talk about work at home. Not me, but my sibling is a sheriff in a Canadian province. Sheriffs in Canada handle courtroom security and transportation of prisoners. She had one person in custody who was on trial after getting caught for murdering multiple women. He was in his early 20s and her exact words were, "Thank goodness he got caught because if I didn't know better I definitely would have been friends with the guy."